All right, her website is nomiprinz.com, nomiprinz.com, all the president's bankers. She's got a new novel out. She's written nonfiction books as well. We're going to go over the current, what's happening in the economy and your take on it and everything. What else do you think we should know? What else is coming up?
Well, there's a lot. My new book is out last week, All the President's Bankers, the hidden alliances that drive American power, and that power manifests in domestically, internationally, from the standpoint of what happens with the Fed, through the standpoint of what happens through the international entities like the World Bank and IMF. And it was probably the hardest book I've written. There's 70 pages of footnotes in it. And some of them I got right near Austin when I was at the LBJ library, through the other libraries as well. And there's a lot of really good history, starting from Teddy Roosevelt through Obama and the relationships of the presidents to all of the specific bankers of their time, the personal relationships, the social connections, and why those manifested in policies for us.
Tell us what you think about the stock market, derivatives, the state of the world economy right now.
Well, the state of where we are right now is this conglomeration and concentration of more power and wealth in the hands of a smaller group of individuals, institutions than ever in the history of our country. And for example, right now, the big six banks in the United States control, and this is a big number, 84% of our insured deposits, 96% of the derivatives in the United States, and 45% of the derivatives in the world. So what does that mean? They have the largest pool ever and the most concentrated pool, the most monopolistic pool ever of our deposits, leveraged into speculative trading that enables them to have the largest proportion ever of dangerous derivatives in our history. And right now, having gone through the 2008 crisis, we're at a point where our bigger banks are bigger than before. They have been allowed to be so and subsidized by that with plans from the Treasury Department as well as the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve book today is $4.2 trillion of debt. That means, breaking down, $1.6 trillion of mortgage securities. Those are the toxic securities that imploded the financial system and the global economy. And $1.6 trillion of them are on the books of the Fed. And almost $3 trillion worth of other types of debt securities, Treasury securities, are also on the books of the Fed. That means we are funding the additional speculation of these more concentrated, more powerful banks in a manner that has never been seen before in our history, that is more dangerous than ever before. And in addition, we have had the longest period of zero interest rate policy, with the Fed giving money effectively freely, in addition to all of this other help in all of our deposits, to these institutions. And that is a policy that is longer and has been going on for more years than ever before. And that includes during wars, after wars, in any form in the Fed's history as well. So that's where we're at today. That's a really dangerous position. And it's not just that concentration of speculation and wealth and capital. It's the concentration of political and financial power that's behind having all of that concentrated wealth and leveraged capital power. And that's really where we're standing today. It's a very, very precarious place.
And now they want to use the Ukraine crisis they helped create, regardless of which side people are on, to create a Marshall Plan for all of Europe, claiming that the crisis they have engineered on record is going to bring down all of Europe if they don't get hundreds of billions of dollars to keep propping up their scam. Do you agree with that analysis?
I'm so glad you brought up the point of the scam aspect of that in the Marshall Plan, because there is such a connection. And I went through a lot of Truman's records and his relationships with John McCloy and various bankers at the time that the World Bank was being established and that we were in the period of the post-war into the Cold War. And at that time, the idea was that there had to be an expansion of the U.S. as a political superpower and also of the banks as a financial component of that superpower. And they mutually reinforced each other. So this idea of fighting the Cold War was also about expanding this financial influence globally. And the World Bank, in fact, John McCloy, who later became the chairman of Chase, had asked Truman, when he was offered to the presidency of the World Bank, he said, I will only take that position if you let me trade those bonds through Wall Street, where his friends were and where he ultimately wound up and where he came from. And that gave the financial interests at the time the start of their ability to dictate where funds went. And they went, and I'm getting to the Ukraine because there's a really interesting through line here. In the 50s, they went into Cuba, which, of course, Fidel Castro ultimately nationalized the banks in 1959. But in the mid-50s, they went to Cuba because that was the alignment of military and financial presence. In Beirut as well, because that was where bankers wanted to go to have access to the Middle East initially in the 50s. And there was a rising there in 1958, to which Eisenhower sent troops. And that was just the beginning of this connection. You fast forward that through line to the Ukraine today, and there's the same form of what was established back then of propping up this idea of this sort of ideological war, because that plays well in terms of rhetoric on both sides.
And then they call stopping the war and rebuilding Ukraine a new Marshall Plan, when all it is another wealth transfer right to George Soros, who's calling for it. Nomi, what are the major players? Who are they? I mean, I know who they are, but I want to get your take on it. And I want you to tell the listeners, what is their current posture? How would you describe what's happening in the stock market? Is it going to be deflationary, or is it going to be inflationary, or could we see a new form of stagflation? What should folks expect out there with the 1.5 quadrillion, with all the new debts, with acceleration of derivatives since 2008, with all the same players insulated above the law? It looks to me like imploding things on purpose to consolidate them, a scorched earth creative destruction approach. What's the weather report financially?
Yeah, I mean, certainly that consolidation of wealth and that power and that capital, that leveraged capital, which was what is meant by all those derivatives, has been such a problem before the 2008 crisis, and it's always debt. It's always been this idea that if you push too much debt, whether it's the form of loans like they used to be back 100 years ago, or whether it's in the form of complex derivative securities that aren't regulated, that aren't transparent, that are off book, that even when we talk about the assets of a bank, we don't really know where all of the little ties to all of the offshore bank accounts are, because they're not really consolidated into the books that we are actually supporting at the end of the day with our deposits and with the FDIC insurance and all the government subsidies that go to these banks. So that's where we're at. And one of the reasons that currently the stock market is so high is not because the general American is feeling like they've had this 100+% return on their personal life and their personal finances and their personal salaries. No, it's because there's this additional influx of cheap money, of subsidies for debt that has been engineered by the Federal Reserve through these large banks, of which, of course, JP Morgan Chase is the largest bank. It's the most politically and financially connected bank, and it has been throughout history for the last 100 years. What this enables to happen is the stock market rise, which is pumped up by this sort of artificial euphoria, which is based on zero interest rate money to the large players. We don't get zero interest rate money, they do. And they have the ability to leverage it, whether it is through derivatives, through ETFs, through various bets in the stock market, through timing the stock market, through buying back their own shares, through all sorts of different mechanisms that have had the effect of creating this big stock market bubble. And we've seen it in the past. It's just not really been as dangerous as it is today, because there is such a lack of understanding or restraint from the powers that be in Washington, from a regulatory perspective, from a policy perspective. This is continuing. And what's happening now is because there's no accountability, no one's gone to jail, the fines that the Department of Justice has levied and the SEC has levied on these institutions are tiny. They're less than 0.5% of the assets of these big six banks, that they're a joke. And so when there's no recourse, when there's no reform, when there's no punishment for using money in a way that devastates the global economy, it continues to get used. What we're seeing now in the stock market is one manifestation of where that money is going. So what happens going forward? I've said this before. I don't think this is obviously not stable, good economic or financial policy, what's been going on since the crisis and into the crisis. It is not sustainable. But there is such a force of this bad policy and unsustainable policy that's had the effect of boostering the market, whereas I believe that we're going to be headed for a major crash, because you cannot continue a policy of inflating a market with nothing real. And that is what we are visioning right now. Now, I think it's going to take a little bit of time. People ask me, is it going to be a year from now, a half year? I don't really know. I'll say this. It should have not gotten this high, and I believe it should have crashed sooner since it started moving after the 2009 influx of cheap money and of debt buying from the financial institutions. It should have happened sooner, but there's a lot of will on the part of Washington and the Federal Reserve to continue to keep it going. The ECB is instituting bond buying and zero interest rates almost. That it's a global partnership of propping up these markets and propping up the banks that move them. Therefore, from an investment perspective, I look at this being a period of volatility right now. In other words, it's going to go up and down like we've been seeing for a little while, with a tendency to go up because of this artificial support, and ultimately a very steep decline on the other side because there's nothing real sustaining this support. And I think that's in a couple years. I think it could happen sooner if there's a major derivatives transaction or something that unwinds that all the banks are involved in. It's usually about credit or currency, so it might be related to the Ukraine. It might be related to somewhere in Latin America. There's a lot of chance that there are interdependencies and derivatives positions that these banks are intertwined in, as we see every time there's a crash that is going on right now. And so there could be an external instigator, but right now there's a tremendous amount of artificial stimulus going into this financial globalization markets, into the banks, into the stocks, and into the derivatives.
The facts are in. The studies are legion. Sodium fluoride and other toxic members of the fluoride family are devastating the health and cognitive ability of the American people. So why are the social engineers adding it to the water? Simple. Dumb down the host population that the parasitic technocracy is feeding on. We may not have been able to get fluoride out of the water supply yet, but we can help to get it out of our bodies. I am extremely excited to announce the exclusive InfoWars Life Fluoride Shield formulation, fusing 6 of the best documented ingredients from around the world to help the body remove not just toxic fluoride residues from the body, but a whole host of toxic substances. Let's take a stand against the globalists by blocking their poisons with Fluoride Shield. I use Fluoride Shield every day. Secure your Fluoride Shield and other pioneering formulations at InfoWarsLife.com today. Let's start cleansing our bodies now and support the InfoWar at the same time. That's InfoWarsLife.com. Nomi, you worked around these people. You worked for, the head of Goldman Sachs reported into him in his office at the time. We see how John Corzine is above the law with the stuff he did with Goldman Sachs and then MF Global. Is there any way to get through to these people? Because I know they've scientifically set up their systems of control. They have their political hatchet men, their spin doctors, their formulas. But history shows that they always believe their formulas, and then they start smoking their own propaganda, and you get World War II, you get World War I, you get Roman collapse, you get famines, you get serious disconnect, Marie Antoinette type, French Revolution stuff. And is there any way, knowing how these guys act, knowing how arrogant they are, and they make the Wolf of Wall Street pale in significance with their bravado or chutzpah or whatever you'd call it, is there any way to get through to these loons? Because anyone can look at where the world's going and tell they're not going to get out of this, and neither are we. And can they stop themselves? Is there some way to get these people to act in a more sane way? I mean, why would they want to get rid of checks and balances for the people and then make themselves above the law? That sounds like a horrible world. Tyranny's not safe for anybody.
Well, but they have been rewarded for bad behavior, and that's the problem that we have right now. Historically, there have been periods, for example, after the crash in 1929, where the bankers that were total scam artists, they were tax evading, they were creating little companies named after family members, they were hiding shares, they were telling the public to buy shares while they were shorting shares. All this stuff has gone on. The difference was some of those guys got ejected and new people came into place. And some of those guys got fined and new people came into place. And there was a stability. It wasn't perfect. A lot of things went wrong between, say, the 30s and the 70s, but there was more of a stability because there was an accountability on the side of some of these individuals who realized they had come to the abyss. And yes, they wanted and needed and got government support to get them out, but they also took a step back of their own sort of accord or fear or whatever it was. And what we've seen more recently, though, is a much more dangerous use of the capital that they control. Jamie Dimon, last week was all contrite about how he was sorry. Maybe he underestimated things. But this is after J.P. Morgan Chase, the bank, has paid all these fines, which to the public look like a lot, but to them are absolutely nothing. And it was probably after some media consultation that someone told him, look, you're kind of being, just so you know, in case you didn't realize, people think you're a jerk and try to be nice. And then he did. And then all of a sudden the media was all over him saying he was sorry. And that was somehow good. And we've moved on. But the thing is, that's all just words. The behavior hasn't changed. The bets internally haven't changed. The structure of these banks haven't changed. They've been rewarded by, and J.P. Morgan Chase in particular has been rewarded by allowing itself to buy Bear Stearns, Washington Mutual, having the government support, having the federal connections, and it continues on. So what needs to happen for these guys to wake up? They buy their own story. They buy the fact that they are sort of kings. Jamie Dimon, Lloyd Blankfein, these guys really buy the fact that they have dodged a major bullet. They had a tremendously bad experience running their own institutions, and they were bailed out big time, epically by the government, by us. So these particular individuals have absolutely no reason to look within their banks and be worried, because even if positions are going sour every single day, even if there's billions of dollars of losses accumulating on their books every single day, they know, they've been shown that these things will get bailed out, that they will be covered. So what it requires, unfortunately, and this is a really bad situation that we're in right now because so much has been covered up, we will see a bigger crisis. There will be a situation in the near future where these banks will have another bout of significant losses, where we're going to talk about too big to fail again and wonder why we made these big banks bigger, where we're going to wonder why we propped up, when I say we, I mean most of the media propped up these individuals as somehow being great navigators of this situation, of the crisis, of Obama and Tim Geithner and Jack Lew all having dodged this bullet. And the reality is there's been nothing that has fundamentally changed. So I can only see change coming from a bigger crisis, and that either comes from within the financial markets themselves and the banks themselves and positions themselves that implode, and we have this whole other round of crisis management, or it comes from individuals who say, look, this is too much. We don't believe that things have changed. We think things have been whitewashed. We need to do something about this because our economy, our houses, our savings, our pensions, our deposits are at risk otherwise.
I've been asking a lot of questions, and I want to get into your book here, because sometimes you can reach the public through a novel, a historical novel, instead of just, cold, hard facts now. But in your gut, what else are you concerned about? And then is there any positive news you've got for people?
Honestly, the positive news that I have, and I do talk in All the President's Bankers about this, and did, that is the nonfiction book I've just came out with, is that there was a time where there was a kind of solidarity of what people needed for the economy to grow and what the government was willing to provide and what they were willing to do to keep bankers accountable. There's always been close personal ties, personal connections, same schools, same clubs, intermarriages, friendships, protege mentorship relationships between the White House and Wall Street. But there was a time in our past, and I think the hope is to look into it, between the 30s and the 70s, where at least, even though all the people in that equation wanted power, whether it was American power globally, politically, whether it was financial power globally from an economic and trade standpoint, they still were able to see the public good. They were still able to sort of walk and chew gum and see a public interest that could only be served if there was some restraint. If people, went to jail if they committed fraud or crimes, if banks were made smaller or at least divided from the risks they could take if they took too much risk and the government or society was on the hook for it. So there was a time when things were more stable, there was growth in the country for individuals, and these people still were able to make money. So the kind of hope lies in the past. The unfortunate thing is that, from the 70s and 80s and certainly through on today, no matter who was in government, whether it was Republican, Democrat, Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, doesn't matter, because those alliances with Wall Street have really been working towards the detriment of not just us, but also the world. And so we need to dial that back. There is an answer in our past, but there's also a very, very strong possibility if we don't look at that, if we don't try to be better than our past, not even like that aspect of our past, because it had problems, that we are going to suffer wider consequences. So there's some hope in that, but there's also a warning in that.
Again, I've been asking the questions. What else is on your radar?
The worrisome thing, and we talked a little bit about it. You did ask this, so I'll just answer it again. Is the Ukraine situation, only because it's being perceived as more of an ideological fight, a new Cold War, and so forth. When in fact it is really a financial fight. It's a globalization of financial fight, and it's who gets the calling rights to that particular part of the world. Russia has been moving its banks into the Ukraine. European and American banks have kind of retreaded after the 2008 crash, and they're looking to come back into that area because it's a very good outpost to Eastern Europe. And so there's a lot of problems that could result in that. There's also problems that could result in what's happening in Asia with respect to additional speculation, and not so much China's growth or not growth and all the things that are headlined in the media, but what happens with the real speculation where China is trying to really compete to some extent its banks with American and European banks, and for example expanding types of transactions and alliances with Latin America. We've seen that story play before in the 70s. American banks went after Latin America, created a whole lot of debt in that situation. We had a third world debt crisis in the 1980s, which was the start of a tremendous amount of bailouts that we have manifested and just gone bigger since that period of time. And now I see that coming from this other side of the world. It's like the competition in finance and in globalized finance is to try and sort of soak all the rest of the countries from the standpoint of the countries that have more concentrated wealth or financial institutions, and then try to have the rest of the world.
Sure, New York wants to be London. And then you've got Germany wanting to get to be the new London, and then it's like who can whore themselves out the best, who can devalue the currency the fastest, while actuarying shutting down all your competition and small business so you can pump up your fraudulent ballot sheet. I mean, it is a race to the bottom, as Ross Perot said.
And that's really the main worry, that this race to the bottom, this idea of sort of plundering commodities or different types of local establishments as banks grow has been something that has been intrinsic, particularly since what I call the age of financial capitalism, which I think started 100 years ago with J.P. Morgan and the Fed, and sort of this idea that there would be backing to bad bets. And that idea has been really solid through all of what we've seen, all the negatives that we've seen with concentrated banks becoming bigger, with smaller banks getting eaten up, with concentrated businesses becoming bigger and smaller businesses getting eaten up or dying in the process. And the funds, the liquidity, the money that goes into these larger institutions gives them a bigger benefit as well. Because if you're getting, for example, 0% money, then you can do a lot of damage if you have no accountability to even the money that you're getting.
And then when they lose that money, it just gets bailed out on top of it.
Well, exactly. I mean, the fact that the Federal Reserve has a $4.2 trillion balance sheet, we are not in a time of war. We're not really in the time of any sort of physical, violent danger, for example, on our country, and yet the financial danger is so big that this is the largest amount of subsidies that the Federal Reserve has ever provided the largest banks in the history of its existence.
Well, look, this is done by design. It's the Japan route. Japan, as you know, is the test. 20 years of recession, depression, and they're doing all this on purpose, in my view. And there's a method to their madness. I think it's going to blow out of control and cause war and famine and revolution. They think they can ride that to even more police state, use the revolutions they cause as a way to have civil wars or internal police actions. I think that's the master plan. Nomi Prinz, tell us about your book. I haven't read it yet. I've read two of your other nonfiction books. Tell us about your book and how folks get it.
It's called All the President's Bankers, The Hidden Alliances That Drive American Power. It's on Amazon. You can also get some more information and excerpts on it on my website. I have excerpts about the IMF and the World Bank evolution and how that impacts today, as well as all of the...
So this is a nonfiction. Didn't you just write a novel too?
Yeah, I'm just pumping them out, Alex.
Now, I want to read this book, so tell me about it.
Well, actually, no. The thing is, this nonfiction came out of a scene in my novel Black Tuesday that was out a couple years ago, and there was a scene in it where the 6 bankers in 1929 got together at the Morgan Bank and figured out how to save themselves, and it didn't work so well. But all of those banks still exist today. So at the end of the day, we had a Great Depression. These banks survived, became bigger, and they are what they are today: J.P. Morgan Chase, Citigroup, and so forth. So it kind of started with a novel, but All the President's Bankers is really it was my way to use that little kernel and examine all of the relationships throughout all of the presidential libraries in the country over the presidents that have been presidents over the last 100 years, and the relationships with the 6 main bankers of the time, and look at how they coordinated what they wanted and needed from each other, and were the sort of mutually interdependent entities in Wall Street and Washington. There's no division. They're the same, components of the same political financial power structure, and how they operated. So there's a lot of documents in there that I examined through different archives. I didn't want anyone to say, oh, you're just talking about these people, it's a conspiracy. Well, it's not. I have all of the information. It's well documented in the book. There's 70 pages of footnotes that were kind of a real pain to put together. The footnotes are always the hardest part, and there's a lot of them. But it's really to show people there's real meat here. We're not just talking about this stuff. There's real...
This isn't our opinion. You know what's interesting?
Exactly, Alex. That's exactly right.
I get real busy and thought this was a novel, and I had just said, please get Nomi Prinz on about all the crises. But now that I know about this book, send me a copy. And come back on in like 2 weeks and let's go over this book. This sounds powerful. Nomi Prinz, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you so much, Alex. Take care.
Thank you. Wow, great lady. Just a great whistleblower. I mean, she was the top of her game, going up in the company, the very top, and she said, I'm not going to be part of this. This is evil. One of the first people warning of the derivatives from the inside back in the 2003, was it she left? So, great lady. The facts are in. The studies are legion. Sodium fluoride and other toxic members of the fluoride family are devastating the health and cognitive ability of the American people. So why are the social engineers adding it to the water? Simple. Dumb down the host population that the parasitic technocracy is feeding on. We may not have been able to get fluoride out of the water supply yet, but we can help to get it out of our bodies. I am extremely excited to announce the exclusive InfoWars Life Fluoride Shield formulation, fusing 6 of the best documented ingredients from around the world to help the body remove not just toxic fluoride residues from the body, but a whole host of toxic substances. Let's take a stand against the globalist by blocking their poisons with Fluoride Shield. I use Fluoride Shield every day. Secure your Fluoride Shield and other pioneering formulations at InfoWarsLife.com today. Let's start cleansing our bodies now and support the info war at the same time. That's InfoWarsLife.com. Visit InfoWars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. When you're on the site, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.